Hello AOS fans, Robin here. I'm back with a very exciting new series for you, looking at the new Cubicle 7 role-playing game, Soulbound, set in the Age of Sigmar universe. Now, I have been on record as saying I'm not overly keen on the AOS universe, but I've been really looking forward to this publication because I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of life in the mortal realms, and I think this is the best way to do it. This is how I kind of got into the old world back in the day. I know a lot of people lament the loss of the old world, myself included, but this is the stuff of how I got into it, this kind of writing of all the Enemy Within campaign, all that kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to the opportunity for do the same thing in the AOS universe. So in this series of videos, we're going to look at the game. I haven't played it yet, but I do have a lovely PDF copy sent to me by the lovely people at Cubicle 7. And so far, I'm really impressed with what I've looked at. And so I'm going to go through it. Today I'm going to look at character creation, just the basics of it. I'm not going to look at the archetypes that you can play today. I'm just going to look at the basic sets, and then the next video, which will hopefully follow on soon, will be about the archetypes that you can play in the game. One final thing before we move on, I do love the amazing artwork in the book, and the cover typifies that. It really makes you want to jump in and start playing. So how does the game work then? Well, looking at the very top level, what is a Soulbound? You play Soulbound characters in the game. They're heroes chosen from the mortal realms for their skill and ability, tasked with the pushing back the forces of chaos, death and destruction. But the price of becoming Soulbound is high. You're permanently tethered to people you may not agree with or even like. You're bound to them until you or they die. You can immediately see that unlike some role-playing games, this is a very stylized sort of party of players. Often you'll sort of casually meet in an inn and start doing some minor level encounters, and from there you go on to form a party, and anything is possible. Here the connection is much more visceral. It's kind of like almost like a conscious choice to become involved with these other heroes around you. The whole process of party management is kind of formalized in this Soulbound mechanic, if you like. And it's interesting because the Stormcast Eternals are outside of that. They can't be part of a sort of binding. They have their own bounding. They're already bound to Sigmar. So it's an interesting dichotomy immediately. The Stormcast already set apart from everybody else in the realm. I'm quite fascinated by this kind of formalised party. It's quite a departure, I think, for most role-playing games, and I think it's quite interesting. The setup is immediately heroic and epic. You may have many different reasons for becoming part of this binding, but you are basically in this to protect the mortal realms. Your soul. You're very much giving up your soul for the benefit of the place in which you live. So let's have a little look about that, how that might actually work. We've got the character creation chapter, and I'll start by showing you a little top section of the character sheet. This is just the top half of the character sheet. The first two things you'll notice up there are archetype and species, and they are what will drive your character, and they will define your character. Depending on what archetype you choose, that may well define your species, but similarly, if you want to play a particular species, that will define your archetype. And what archetypes are there? Well, there's a little bit of granularity here, but you've got Free People, Daughters of Cain, Fire Slayers, Idoneth, Deepkin, Caradon Overlords, Stormcast Eternals, and the Sylvaneth, and they will be dug down into further as you look into the game. I will cover that in a separate video, but there are more grades of archetype that you can choose than just those ones. And I'll look at those in a future video. Species, then, you can probably mostly guess what species are available in the game. You can play humans, you can play Stormcast Eternals, you can play elves, you can play Dwarden, and you can play Sylvaneth. But many more exist, it says, and Aurochs and Ogres and things will be hopefully in the game later in future books, but also you can create your own books at the end of the chapter. I haven't read that far in the book yet, but although there are the 5 main species, it looks like anything is the limit if you're just limited by your imagination, really, which is how it should be. One little side note for the Stormcast players, you can actually see how many times you were reforged your Stormcast. There's various rules around it, and it can change things, as you know from the lore. When you have your Stormcast, each time they're reforged, they start to lose their memories, and things become sort of more confused for them as the more and more times they're reforged. And that there are mechanics in the game to reflect that. But you can also play a newly forged Stormcast if you wish. Moving deeper into the character now, still looking at the character sheet here, I'm going to look at how they define the body, mind and soul. These are the three main statistics of the game, and I guess will give you everything you want to know about your character. Looking at the body represents your physical strength, your reflexes and your coordination. It affects your melee and your defense. All these stats come up when you have an archetype. They have base stats, and that's what defines what they are. The mind is effectively your intelligence and your awareness and your perception. It will affect your accuracy and your natural awareness and your initiative. The soul represents your inner being, is your sense of self, your spirit and your determination, and your ability to resist chaos characters. And that will affect your mettle and your effectiveness with miracles and such like. So those are the three main stats you can see down the left hand side of the character sheet: body, mind and soul. And it's worth reiterating that when we look at the archetype sections of the game, we'll see those in action. They're defined by what archetype you choose, although the rules makers are keen to point out that you can tinker with that if you want to, and switch stats around and kind of make your character have any iteration of those three that you like. That depends on how you want to play them. The rulebook then goes on to look at the more personal aspects of your character, so things like hair colour and height. And this really reminded me of the old Wolfbrook character pack, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay character pack that came out for first edition and has existed in other iterations since. It has charts for working out distinguishing features and so hair colour, weight, that kind of thing, age, and there's a whole way of setting out how your character is going to look during the games. And then a more significant element of the game is choosing your goals, and these are really significant. You have short-term and long-term goals, which obviously you decide with the GM as you go on. Their ways of fleshing out your character as the campaign continues. Short-term goals are maybe, I don't know, clear out a particular dungeon. Long-term goals, it might be as much as completely remove the effect of chaos from a whole area of the map, that kind of thing. Much bigger goals, which are much more campaign oriented. And again, you thrash out the story with your GM about that, and I guess people may have conflicting goals. It all depends on how you want to run your games. Often in RPGs, these can be quite wishy-washy things, and depending on the nature of your group, may be forgotten after the first or second game or session. But in this game, they actually have very definite benefits to completing them. You get extra boons and things if you do manage to complete your goals. One thing that's perhaps worth looking at is the party or the binding rules. There is a definite distinction. It's a little bit esoteric without having played the game, I think, but the party refers to everybody, and the binding, and specifically in the group of characters in a binding, so they're the people who have kind of committed to each other. And remember, Stormcast Eternals stand outside of that. Now, one of the things that bindings do have is this concept of soulfire, and there's also a concept of doom. I guess soulfire really is almost like a fate point or an inspiration point. It's a way of marking out your characters as particular heroes, so that they can perform particularly heroic type feats. Doom is a measure of the despair in the realm as chaos sort of tries to exert its force over there. Soulfire is controlled by the player characters and is equal to the number of people in the binding. I don't quite know how Stormcast Eternals working within that. And then Doom is controlled by the DM. As I mentioned at the top of the video, the binding process is much more formalised than your average adventuring party in a role-playing game, and for that they have this connections chart. Now I'm guessing you can probably make your own connections up, but this is a way of quickly kind of working out why you're bound to your counterpart. So these are kind of before the adventure happened, things that happen in your history which might determine the way you behave towards somebody. They're kind of fragments of memory you have, so they're not somebody like you're not enthralled to them, but they're ways of kind of linking you through to the other players in the group and giving you sort of some riff on which to roleplay off, which I think is a really nice touch. Next, we're going to have a look at another part of the character sheet. This is the lower part of the character sheet, and it is your combat abilities. Now, there's no rolling involved in this game. These are all derived stats, and they're derived mostly from your 3 main stats that we discussed earlier. So your mind, your soul, and your body. And as you can see down the left hand side, you've got symbols and the extraordinary, superb, great, good, poor, average, and these form the main part of your combat abilities. Then they're derived stats. You've got your melee, your accuracy, and your defense, and they're derived from your mind, your body, and your soul. Your melee is derived from your body stat and any skills and attributes that you've taken as part of your archetype. So although they're derived, you do have control over them to determine how good a combat fighter you are or how defensive you are. Accuracy is derived from your mind stat, and your defense is derived from your soul. I don't want to go into a massive amount of detail about how this works, but you basically work out your number and compare it on this ladder that they have, with values 11 to 12 being extraordinary and 1 to 2 being poor, and then you would fill that in on the character sheet, as you can see on the left hand side. It is perhaps worth noting, as that chart fades away, in the centre of your character sheet you've got this attack DN, where you compare the values of your maybe attack versus defense or accuracy versus defense, and depending on, it gives you a difficulty number depending on the 2 ratings. So if you've got 2 or more steps higher, so if you were extraordinary, get somebody who's average, you'd be a difficulty number of 2. But similarly, if you were only average, you would find somebody who was superb or extraordinary, be 2 or more steps, so you'd have a difficulty number of 6. And we're getting very close to completion now with a few more derived stats. We've got Toughness, a classic Warhammer stat, which is equal to your mind, body, and your soul. And there are other ways of improving it. And then you've got your wounds. Once your toughness has been reduced to 0, you start to take wounds, which is an interesting way. Toughness always used to be very constant in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, but now you only take wounds once your toughness has gone down to 0. And finally, there's your mettle, which is another derived stat that measures your drive to succeed, how good you are at performing certain things, whether you can use your talents under pressure and perform miracles and stuff like that. There are a couple of other derived stats. The derivations aren't entirely simple, so I haven't gone into them here. Those are a bit kind of esoteric, but there's also your natural awareness, which is almost like your standing perception, and then your initiative, which is how quickly you react to things. But then that's it. Then you have got to the end, it says finished. And then you go into the whole archetype section, which I should do a separate video for later. I will leave you with a couple of lovely bits of artwork from Soulbound. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was good fun to make. I'm really loving reading through the rulebook. Can't wait to show you the archetypes. Do let me know if there's anything you want to know. I'll try and answer any questions I can. Do let me know if you've already bought this. Do let me know if you're planning on playing Soulbound. Do let me know if this has whetted your appetite. I would love to know if you are enjoying this. We will be doing more Soulbound content, so please, if you're not already, please do subscribe. And if you are a regular subscriber, thank you very much. And we'll see you very soon. Bye.